Howdy from Tucson. We're glad you made it over to our video. If you take a look on our website, the BDR, under the menu item News, the Lunch Gathering, you'll find we have several hundred videos ranging from digital AM transmission to antennas to studio maintenance and construction, all sorts of really important videos that you will enjoy and benefit from. If you can, please subscribe to our channel. The more the merrier. If we get 1,000 folks, we may even generate a little cash to give out during our presentations. So thank you. See you later. But today, our whole theme is firewalls and how to make them better understood, how to be secure as best we can. And this, goes different ways, because you have the very large stations that are going to have an IT department, and they're going to be able to have people that really understand IP wonderfully. And then you have really small market stations and pop stations that the engineer is generally dragooned in, or the owner's 8-year-old kid is to set up the circuit and the network. The other third option, of course, are those stations and groups that are serviced by the MORDOC, preventer of IP, preventer of information. So let's get together, let's share our knowledge, let's see how we can answer questions, and don't feel restrained. Use the chat box if you want to ask a question, or at the appropriate time, open your mic. Either way, raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you and see if we can't solve it. Today, I'm really pleased. We have three very excellent folks to share with us. Brad Pedersen, and Wayne Pecena, and Danny Ray Boyer are all going to talk a little bit with us and tackle different aspects here. And I really like Brad's idea of understanding the philosophy of what we're doing first. Because what is a firewall? Well, you could look at it like a brick wall, and in its ultimate implementation with the MORDOC, there's no holes in it. You can't do anything. You might be able to run whatever's on your computer, but you can't reach the internet, you can't download, you can't upload, you can't see anything anywhere, do anything. That's the ultimate firewall. So we poke little holes through it for a purpose. And Brad, I'm going to turn it over to you then and talk to us about what we're going to do and why we want to be careful about it.
Thanks, Barry. No, it's funny, when we were talking yesterday, I said the ultimate firewall is to unplug the transmitter so nobody could get to it. So we can make sure that nothing will ever go wrong. It'll never change. So no, that was again, it's funny, Grady had asked me, Grady Motes, I see him there, had asked me about, he said, oh, well, we were going to talk about firewalls, and I've worked with Grady on helping him secure some things in his sites as well. But I said, well, I didn't know who the audience was and everything, and different levels of expertise, and I imagine it ranges. But it's the philosophy that I sort of start with is something's better than nothing. And so you can go from zero, everybody's welcome, to NSA, and then of course everything in between. And I've always said to people that two easy ways to do IT security is none and nothing. Nothing being you can't do your job. It's just completely locked down, and let's just unplug the transmitter. All the work is in the middle. So when you say no, no security doesn't quite work for us because we just put up the welcome sign, everybody comes in, and complete lockdown. Why don't you just unplug the network and put a big switch on the front of the whatever device, you can drive there and take care of it yourself. So that was sort of, I had when I spoke with Barry yesterday, he said there's going to be a couple people following me that are going to give some more detailed, higher level kind of presentations. So I said, well, I'll talk about the philosophy and maybe a few just simple things that we all look at and say, well, doing the job that the NSA would be proud of is, let's just say, impossible. There'll always be somebody that could break into your network, and there's always going to be somebody that will raise their hand and say, not good enough, not good enough. And some people then take that as a, well, why don't we just say, screw it, and not do anything because I can't do it right. So but if you look at it, I think a lot of us could understand is just a simple password, even if it was Fred, is going to keep out 90%. If we say Fred exclamation point, we start moving up to 92. Fred exclamation point number, and as our password gets longer, we're keeping out more and more. The idea that you'll actually keep out everybody all the time is just not going to happen. You can, we all see the reports, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't at least try to go after the low-hanging fruit. And so when I was thinking about it this week, I was looking at some of you guys' past articles, and Jeff, is it Welton? I think it's Welton. I've met him before. I just never remember his last name, from Nautel. I guess he puts out a little list of all of the open transmitters, Comrexes, and what have you, periodically. And so my guess is a bunch of us have seen that, but maybe some of us haven't. But it's what that says to me is some of us, whoever us is, are not going after the low-hanging fruit. And that would be my basic message. By the way, if somebody raises their hand and says we need better, I agree. So, and I could tell you about better as well, but there'll be a couple people following that. But at minimum, let's go after the low-hanging fruit. It's a piece of cake. And I wanted to, I guess I can screen share here, just as all right, let me see where's I think this is it. All right. You kind of gather a couple pictures here in my picture viewer. So you'll see I got rid of, this is one of my things. What station is this brick link that I'm looking at? Well, you don't know. And it's, why should I tell you? And why should I have this go on, YouTube and what have you? So the information that's there it's pretty easy to just don't advertise. So I see many times when people send me emails, here's the keys to the kingdom. So things like that too. But so there's some basic stuff you can do, like don't tell everybody more than they need to know, or at least don't make it public. Make sure you're dealing with a trusted individual and make sure they know, please don't share this. But this, Comrex brick, so your STL link, many people's STL link, they're found wide open. So there's two parts of it that are wide open very often, is that, first of all, the whole thing is just sitting on a public IP on the internet. And just like Jeff finds, and what do you know, it's admin in Comrex or anything you like in Comrex. And every time you open it, it complains about it, but you say, okay, whatever. But who's going to come after me and all of that? And I can tell you, many of you, and certainly I have seen firewall logs about the 100 hits I got from someplace last second, forget about last week. So there are people that do scans and stuff. They don't have to be coming after you. They're just kind of spraying, attacks, if you will. But some of these things is, again, what if we put a password in to allow incoming connections? It's just such a crazy, easy thing to do. You don't really have to be the IT guy from, the NSA to know how to do it. We all, I'm assuming a knowledge, the fact that we're all here on Zoom kind of tells me at least we we've at least used a computer, right? So these kind of things are just easy to do. And this is also, especially if it's an STL, this isn't even something you have to go revisit too often. You're not going to be having a bunch of people calling into your STL. It's just this nailed up link. So anyways, things like that just seem easy. By the way, the idea of stay out might not be the best idea for your password. This is just when I typed in, but you know, throw a couple of exclamation points, question mark, something in there. But even stay out would probably stop the vast majority of people. Typically, someone that knows how to get into your brick and what to do with it is going to be a little more sophisticated than the guy just spraying stuff out. But still, it's like you just make it hard. The way I kind of mentioned it to Barry yesterday, and I've said it to other people before, is I can't guess your phone number. So, but a child could remember it. So again, you just look at the, you know, I don't care if you're Einstein, I'm still not going to be able to guess your phone number. So it's a just some bit of stuff that nobody's going to realize or know is don't use the classics. Admin and password, stay out's another one. There's a bunch of them. Put a little phrase in there that whatever, some words to a song. Dictionary attacks may find it eventually, but it's still going to keep people out for quite a bit. So and the other thing that I kind of went over or I mentioned to Barry is this is a one of the routers that I kind of help people set up. Grady actually had discovered this at the PepLink router, so that's just an interface for it. But you'll notice my nice little white boxes again. Sorry, but the port forwarding is one of those things that people do where they say, you know, I think we all know what port forwarding is. Port forwarding is actually a fairly complex operation if you don't have this little nice little GUI here. There's actually several things that happen when you port forward. You're not only changing the address of the packet and all of that, you're also making allowance rules. There's several things that are going on actually. But if you're having a sort of a little appliance device, you know, your little firewall at your transmitter or your studio, you often, if you're not using something like a Cisco, which is a very nice, you know, there's several really nice devices that can be used, but some of these point and click devices, you can say, well, I'm going to create this NAT for my, you know, Comrex and my, you know, remote control or what have you, but don't just make it a wide open NAT. People do that very often where they'll, because it's just easy. You just say, oh, just make the whole thing available. So now people can attack it in so many ways. The poor little devices are trying to protect themselves. So you may say, well, I can't make it perfect. And that's sort of my whole message here is that there is no perfect. I always would like to see better and could give you lots and lots of suggestions about better, but at least start with basic. Don't start forwarding port 80. We see here port 80. That's actually being translated. So some made up port that we get 50,000 plus to choose from, but we can make up ports that at least people have to dig a little deeper to find you. It's not the obvious web server that, you know, everyone's favorite attack. So if you're looking through your router settings, if you have a kind of a point and click router, look for what they call port address translation. People have heard of NAT, network address translation. Port address translation is also your friend. And again, if you're doing it on a more sophisticated device, you would add specific code to do all these things. You're just adding different layers of complexity to it, but put stumbling blocks where you can, especially the easy ones. Go after the low-hanging fruit. So another thing that I talk to people about is don't put anything on the internet that doesn't need to be there. So in this case here, we see, well, we need to be able to get to our remote control. We have to at least be able to chat with it. Legally, you have to have control of your transmitter. So you do have to have some way of turning it off when the guy tells you he's getting electrocuted or whatever's going on, right? So, and we need to have some way to be able to communicate, get our signal there. Maybe you still have an old phone line and it's like, congratulations, I guess, right? But most of us are these days using something that has some level of exposure. A private circuit is great. There's all kinds of good stuff about all that, but so many of us, especially at our, low power stations or mom and pops, even if you work at biggest station in town, you probably have some side client who's a mom and pop who says, but I don't have any money. So in any case, you can apply this all over. So, but the idea of these two things here, the remote control and the STL, are the only things that are exposed at all. And then at that, you only expose what you have to and try to hide it. If you kind of just keep those few things in mind, you're going to be adding enough stumbling blocks that you've just kept out the vast majority. You think of the level of hacker that has to be, and they're out there, by the way, these really good hackers, but you've just raised the bar significantly. So one of the things I, hear from people when I help set up different things is, well, but I have to be able to get to it. So if you say, well, all right, I have to be able to get to it, it's like, how convenient does it have to be? Not want to be. We'd all love to just have the whole thing wide open and it's automagical on our phone. But what do you really need? And I try to at least get down to that. So we say, well, let's try to at least separate the wants and needs. And so if you want to, you say, all right, well, I have to be able to have my remote control accessible. I have to let my STL in the door, but what about my audio processor? So, all right, well, my audio well, I'd like to be able to get to that. We'll call that a want instead of a need. So that might be something you say, well, it'd be nice if we don't have to drive to the transmitter, but maybe you can set up a VPN. And there's VPNs is one of those things that some of us are going to laugh at how simple it can be, and other of us are going to say it's a black box, don't want to know. So, but just as if money, by the way, is an object too, there are different levels of VPN and sophistication. And I mentioned to Barry, I said, well, there's a built-in client in Microsoft. So, and there's free Apple ones too, if you had a Mac and all of that you can get to. So are they as good as you can get? No, nothing I'm talking about is as good as you can get today. Other people can talk about higher level and even better, but just again, look at some of the simple stuff. So even in this PEP link here, it's one of the things I look for is, do we have a way of doing a personal kind of VPN? So you've either got the layer 2 tunneling, point-to-point tunneling. The point-to-point's been depreciated, but it's way better than nothing. So if that's all you can do, that's what you can do. IPsec is a much better, but again, you can build up, what is it that you can do? OpenVPN is that can have a whole lot of options, but can be more complicated to set up, depends on who you are. So, but if you were to set one of those up, you can say, great, so I bought my little PepLink router or whatever thing that supports these type of things. And then we can go from there and we say, great, I'm going to go to my computer. And so just the quick way, I'm just going to jump through this quick. It will not be exhaustive, but so control panel, I get my network and I say, I'm going to view network and I get to a set up new network. I put my cursor near all the things, set up new connection, right? So when we say that, this is again, all built right into Microsoft. So connect to workplace, and I'm going to do a VPN is how I'm going to do it. It's not dial up, although VPN is sort of like dial up in a way, where it has to, you connect to a certain place, but you don't actually use a phone line. So use my existing connection. 123, 123, there's our IP address. That could also be if you happen to have a, let's say a dynamic DNS service or whatever, a name that goes with your, a DNS name that goes with your IP address. You could put, fred.sam.com, whatever. And that might be easier to remember. It's kind of sad how I start to remember all these IP addresses. It's like you talk about geeky, huh? So anyways, then you give it a name. Let's see here. I think that's my next slide. Oh, sorry. I'm clicking create instead of next on my slides. Right. So VPN to my transmitter. You might put your call letters or whatever, or you might put something if you think that people might possibly be looking at your computer. If it was shared with your kids or something, you might, or maybe not your kids, maybe somebody you trust less, but you might not put the use a different word than the call letters, so people don't know which station it is. Remember my credentials is one of those handy devices. Consider who might be using your computer, whether you want to remember your credentials. And then we move on and we say, okay, great. And we can click on, one way to get to it, by the way, there's many ways that you can negotiate around. I just kind of gave you one example here. And then when we say we're going to connect, it shows me all of my different connections. My computer, by the way, has a whole bunch of these things, but connect. And then when we say, great, it shows me the little screen. It's back to the kind of big Windows screen here. And some of you may be familiar with these kind of, you've seen this with, if you right click on Wi-Fi, you're going to get a list here. If you have VPNs set up like this, they're going to show up at the top. So that's a nice, easy way once you've got it set up. So I'm going to connect to VPN at my transmitter. I'm going to put in my username. Keep in mind, by the way, usernames are part of your security. If it's admin, you should pretty much never, ever have admin as a username that you are trying to keep people out. It's everyone's first guess. So you could actually put in, even though it's sort of clear text on your computer, the fact that you say my username XYZ, you've just fooled a whole bunch more people. Again, these simple little things. You put your password in. Your password should hopefully be more than 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, the longer it is, the better. Again, I think of use a phrase. If phrases don't tend to come up in dictionary searches. So when someone's doing a brute force attack on your network, the phrases, and use a silly phrase, whatever, something that's just kind of like not going to show up in the dictionary. And once again, you've raised the bar. So these are easy things, and it's easy to remember. When people say, well, geez, my network tells me my password needs to be 80 characters long, must include this much, that much, the other thing. That's great, but you can never remember it. So the first thing you do is put a Post-it on your laptop. And so, you kind of almost have no choice. You have to write it all down. If you come up with a phrase that's easy for you to remember, but virtually impossible, again, like guessing your phone number, virtually impossible for people to just guess. That's a lot of security that comes in with that. So again, if you just then say, okay, connect, you can see this wasn't hard to set up. The particulars, everyone always has questions, but this is a pretty easy one, but with a few simple rules about it, you can add, kind of layers, stumbling blocks, layers of security that will, again, it's going to keep out the percentages, just keep increasing. As soon as you do something, you've already taken care of better than 90.
It's interesting that you said layers, because that's where Wayne's going to take us in just a moment.
Absolutely, yeah. So yep, that's my last slide. So good. I put a stop slide in. So, but that's my, my basic, I guess, thoughts for today anyways, is just do something. Even the simple stuff will stop many people, and more is better. I will never disagree with somebody saying, if you know how to do it, have a way to get it done. Absolutely. I would love to see it, but zero kind of doesn't work so well, but let's see if we can do better. And I think probably all of us could.
Brad, I really appreciate your taking the time to share this with us. And Brad Parsons, his name. And Brad, would you welcome questions or we don't want people to suddenly send you 100 questions an hour, but would you welcome anyone that would like to talk to you about what you've shown?
Sure, that's fine. I can't say that I would have time to do tons of helping and stuff, but I can certainly answer some things and maybe point people in some directions in that, and I'd be happy to do that.
Good. I just put your email address in the chat box for some folks to see, and we hope to see you again. And before we pass on to Wayne, are there any questions that someone has particular to what Brad just showed us that you would like to ask right now?
Is Norton VPN safe? I think Daryl just asked. I haven't used Norton VPN, but if generally speaking, if you trust the provider, so I haven't heard anything bad about Norton. I always use Norton antivirus in the past and this and that. So I would say if you have a VPN, something that encrypts, you can establish what is called a VPN, but everyone thinks of a VPN really as encrypted as well. So as long as it has encryption, clear text connection that pretends it's a VPN would be bad, but I would doubt Norton would make it that way. So yeah, know who did it. If it was Fred the Russian hackers, VPN, maybe you might want to avoid it, but knowing something about who's providing it, certainly get it from a trusted person or trusted company, and that's
if it's vodka incorporated or Putin Associates, you probably want to be careful.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, and Norton is certainly yep. So no, and somebody's Cisco boxes, absolutely. Cisco boxes can be great, by the way. They can also be, it depends on whether you speak Cisco, if you're used to dealing with the iOS. So, but it's certainly, we're getting into a really good level of stuff with the Cisco and some of the other boxes that are out there. I think other people are going to cover that in a bit, but I highly support those boxes. It's just a matter of making sure that, if you can't, don't give up, don't stop at nothing.
I had hoped to get Firewall to come show us their $400 box, but unfortunately, they don't respond to email to either their support department or their PR department or anything. And I finally posted on Facebook, and I got somebody from support to say, "Yes, our PR people will." No, they won't, because I've been working on this for over 2 weeks, but it is recommended by a few people as a low end, and as you said, Cisco is at the high end, and there's all sorts of things in the middle. Now,
and there's other high end as well, but yeah.
Yes, yes, of course, and just as there are many routers and modems.
Depends on how big the propeller is.
There you go. Wayne, let's turn to you now, if we could, and you have some slides to show us. And your basic theme is layers. And we're going to focus on the firewall layer, but please take over.
All right. Well, good afternoon to everyone from Central Texas. And I'll get my screen share started here. And be sure I get the right slide. And everything up. So I would like to maybe shift gears a little bit and talk specifically about the firewall. But before I do, can't miss an opportunity to preach a little bit about implementing cybersecurity in general, that you really need to adopt a position of defense in depth, which essentially is you do not rely on a single protection mechanism, such as just a firewall, for instance, that you have multiple protection mechanisms. I often suggest that you use the OSI model to implement that. And with that, you implement different security or different layers of security that are, of course, coordinated rather than some random implementation. But today we want to talk specifically about firewalls, which in essence, a firewall is a packet filter. So let's look a little depth. Again, the principle of defense in depth is kind of like the architecture of a castle. There's multiple layers of protection. If the moat is breached, then you're faced with a wall. If that wall should be breached, there's yet another wall, and so forth and so on. So this is kind of the idea we want to apply. Well, looking at packet filtering, there are basically two fundamental ways to do packet filtering. That's through an access control list or a firewall. And we'll look in a lot more detail about what the firewall might be, because that is one of those terms that can mean a lot depending on the context it's used. And that's kind of where I want to try to maybe bring some clarity to. But in essence, we want to create a protected environment or a protected zone from the outside world. And of course, that outside world or that external network is commonly the public internet today. Looking at an access control list, this is simply a statements that can be added in a layer 3 device, such as a router, that simply permit or denies packets. This is a fundamental packet filter. There are several reasons to use an access control list, more than just filtering. As we get into maybe some more advanced networking, for instance, packets that maybe need to be encrypted for passage across a VPN, that access control list filtering can be used to identify that traffic, or if we're implementing quality of service applications. So there really is more that can be done than just filtering, but really we want to focus on filtering. And when you do filtering, you're really only making two decisions. You're either going to permit that packet to flow, or you're going to deny that packet to flow through that interface of a particular device. As I had mentioned, we can filter at a ingress point, in other words, a input or ingress interface, or we can block that at a egress interface. There are two types of access lists that exist. The standard, which is kind of the simple one, so to speak, that you simply make that permit or deny decision upon a host IP address. And of course, that host IP address is coming from the IP packet header information. Or you have an extended access list, which really takes into account both layer 3 and layer 4 header information. As a result, you have several parameters that you might filter on, ranging from not only the source IP, but maybe the destination IP address, but also port numbers, as well as even protocols. In most applications, you find that you'll use some logical operators to do some combination of these possible parameters and so forth. In implementing a access control list, there are some limitations or some rules that you have to go by. One of those is simply there's only one access control list per interface direction. Of course, in a device with multiple interfaces, that can translate into quite a few different access control lists. But basically, you create that list, and we'll look more at the little detail of the makeup of that access control list, and then you apply it to a specific interface. Again, the guidelines state there's only one list per interface per direction. They are hierarchical in nature and executed in a kind of a top down. So you begin with more specific statements, and then you tend to narrow things as you go down. And again, it is a generic list that is applied to an interface. An important aspect to keep in mind that an access control list has an implicit deny all at the end. So every list that you create must have at least one permit statement, or absolutely no information will flow through that filter. As an example, in this case, this simply command in Cisco terminology is going to permit all IP traffic from any IP address to Indy. So this is kind of the opposite. This pretty well lets anything or in everything pass through that filter, and pretty well, and of course negates the deny all. But really, the firewall is what we're here really to focus upon. And simply, a firewall is a device which is hardware or software, and we'll look at some of the different varieties, that is going to control what IP packets enter or exit a network. In other words, permitting or denying. And oftentimes that firewall is thought as a first level of defense, although once again, I want to emphasize that just having a firewall really is not enough today. There really needs to be further layers or levels of protection. Firewalls also can be very useful, particularly for certain devices that maybe are what I'll call lacking in security capability. Particularly, this comes into a lot of devices that fit under that broad category of the Internet of Things category. And we often find devices, particularly in our broadcast environment, that maybe don't have the best security provisions in them, or does not give us the ability, let's say, to close ports that we're really not using and changing some default configurations so you can use that external firewall in which to add those particular protections you need, and also can be an easy way to, from an administration standpoint, to group different devices, create different layers within a network environment within your facility. And each of those layers or subnets, or however you want to refer, can have different security capabilities. But just like living in a gated community, just because you do live in that gated community, that does not mean that you don't necessarily lock your doors and lock your windows. Again, this firewall is sort of that first layer of defense. So when we talk about firewalls, or the term firewall can have many, many different kind of meanings depending upon its context. One way is to describe firewalls in terms of kind of generations of technology, beginning with generation one, and that is that basic access control list packet filtering. In fact, that was the first form of a firewall. Generation two is commonly referred to as a circuit level gateway, which is performing network address translation, which this wants to to me to suggest that network address translation is a firewall. That can be, I think, a little bit misleading today in terms of what we think of a firewall is. And if we go back a few years, certainly that network address translation was thought to be a way to add some protection. Well, in reality, yeah, it adds some obscurity maybe to host devices, but not necessary protection today. Of course, generation 3 firewalls, where the stateful or dynamic packet filtering comes into play, which we'll talk more about. We also have generation 4, which are application level gateways, commonly known as a proxy. And then we have this generation 5 and beyond. And of course, this is where the marketeers of the world come into play, and we have all kinds of terminology that comes forth. But basically, you have a device that is doing what might be considered application level packet inspection. Normally, firewalls just look at header information, but the generation 5, or often referred to as the next generation, are doing actual looking at the payload of the IP information. And this is really where I think the trend is today under that next generation umbrella type nomenclature. But when we talk about a firewall, I think in general, we're assuming that we're going to do stateful packet inspection. And that's kind of the context, I think, of the common firewall use today. Also keep in mind that firewalls do really more than just packet inspection. Typical products that you might purchase or implement are commonly going to provide such things as DHCP services, maybe provide routing, provide VPN gateway services. In other words, a termination or an endpoint of a VPN gateway. Often can provide threat or malware type protection, particularly one that is doing that packet inspection. Also maybe provide intrusion detection and or intrusion prevention, and of course provide system monitoring and metrics. In other words, knowing what is normal for your network in terms of where your traffic is going and the volume of traffic. Often when things are abnormal, that certainly could indicate a cyber threat type event that is occurring. So monitoring that performance is often important. Again, when we talk about the terminology, another way to look at the term firewall is the types. And this is where, again, we have stateless and stateful type packet filtering. Again, we might have a application gateway such as a proxy or the circuit gateway, and this next gen firewall. And of course, implementing the firewall can come in all kinds of products, and we'll look more at some of those in just a moment. And what I'll call this next generation firewall that certainly implements the traditional packet filtering in stateless and stateful, but again adds this application or deep packet inspection, and often the basis for an intrusion prevention system, which integrates that detection and also actually implementing dynamic firewall rule changes. So real quickly, just to distinguish between stateless and stateful, remember a access control list is simply a filter. It's a fixed type environment. So in a typical environment where we have our protected network and our unprotected, let's say we make a simple HTTP request to a web server in the unprotected environment or the public internet. That web server, of course, is going to reply, but that reply would be blocked by the firewall unless we put a specific rule in that firewall that allowed that response. In the same similar scenario with a stateful inspection firewall, the firewall is going to be aware of the conversation, the TCP conversation that was originated from the protected network to the unprotected side, and it's going to allow that return conversation. And it does that by maintaining effectively a state table within the firewall for the duration of that TCP conversation. And this is something you can actually see and illustrate by the simple establishing a TCP connection and taking Wireshark and look at the sequence of exchange between two host environments. Now, on the surface, this might say that, wow, why do we even need a stateless firewall? That doesn't sound very practical, but a stateless firewall does have a lot of practical use today. And as a result, you'll commonly see a combination of stateless and stateful type inspection. But primarily, the stateless firewall can be very useful to detect what generally I'll refer to as packet anomalies. And often these packet anomalies are being used in some type of cyber attack, at least type attempts or some type of hacking events. So things that are obviously wrong, they can be filtered at that firewall. In a moment, we'll also kind of talk about being a good network citizen and think about packet filtering, but on the outbound side. You know, generally when we talk about firewall, it's always protecting what's coming into our network, but also we want to be good network citizens and we want to protect what is outbound. In other words, they are certain conversations, so to speak, and by conversations, I'm referring to TCP conversations that should never happen. In other words, I should not be originating packets from inside my network from somebody else's address space. As a simple example, but we can use the stateless firewalls in which to filter those type of things. When we go to implement firewall, again, it can be software or it can be maybe an appliance. Looking at just a kind of a random sample of some of the software-based products, there are quite a few products out on the market. All the way to IP tables, which is inherent to the Linux operating system. But there's many both open source software-based firewalls, as well as what I call commercial purchase products. Of course, software-only firewalls, you do have to have some kind of hardware platform to execute that software on. And often you'll hear people refer to, well, I took this old desktop PC that I had and that became my firewall. That may be good, but that may not be so good. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But there's a world of commercial products that are out on the market. Brad certainly have mentioned some of the Cisco products that exist. And of course, Cisco products range from inexpensive, and of course, inexpensive in Cisco terminology or products may not be inexpensive to your pocketbook, but in the grand scheme of things, they have low-end products as well as very high-end products. And of course, other manufacturers are again, these are just some random samplings of, quite honestly, some of the commercial products I'm more familiar with outside the Cisco world. But also, there is a world of what I'll call relatively low cost appliance type products from Ubiquity in their Unify series to Firewall products. Barry, of course, mentioned them. The purple Firewall box is one of those, I think, sub $400 products, and even they have a under $200 ones, the blue Firewall box. So there's a lot of inexpensive products there that serve the basic need. Now, maybe it's you're not going to find all of the features and the performance that you might find in the Cisco ASA firewall or let's say a Barracuda firewall, but again, some of those fundamentals are there. When we go to set up firewalls, of course, everything is going to be different, and it's probably impossible to address everything that's on the market. But in general, you're really going to do two things. First, you got to define the interfaces, and Brad showed us a little bit of that with his PepLink configuration, where we're going to define our interfaces, and this may usually done today in a graphical user interface, although devices such as the Cisco have a command line. And if you are proficient in the Cisco iOS, then you might can very well type command line configurations quicker than you can go through all the check boxes in a graphical user interface. And others such as, well, the Firewall have pretty simple graphical interfaces that are geared at all around your iPhone or your Android smartphone for configuration of those devices. The key thing with the firewall is establishing the rules. Keep in mind that a firewall is by default, new out of the box, is basically going to block all incoming traffic. In other words, deny by default will be the default configuration. So you have to add rules that would allow incoming traffic. And in developing the rules, really what you want to do is have a policy first, and then you create the actual rule syntax to implement that rule or implement that policy in that rule to suit your environment. So kind of in a simple example, we want to accept incoming HTTP traffic from the public internet to our web server. Common thing you need to do if you're going to have a web server that is designed or intended to serve the public. And we would simply create a rule that would allow that to happen. In this particular case, that rule would only allow traffic, TCP traffic, to that particular host device in our network where identified as the web server. Likewise, maybe if we wanted to allow remote desktop protocol access from a specific workstation to that web server, we might have a rule that looks like this. And of course, in a typical devices, you're going to have a whole bunch of rules. Again, most are going to have a graphical type user interface. This is one particular example of displaying all the rules and so forth. Others, again, that's going to vary between products. So where do you place a firewall? Well, the traditional, as we've used several of my illustrations, we're going to kind of put that at the what I'll call the border between the internal and the external network. Again, we also may have a firewall with additional interfaces on it. In other words, one with more than just the two interfaces shown. And this often brings us to some terminology of the three-legged firewall, which is kind of a common term, with the idea that third interface is used maybe to create a DMZ or demilitarized zone where maybe that firewall, or excuse me, that web server is placed. Again, additional protections to that internal network could be provided by access control list on that border router. Then, of course, we have the proxy firewall, which is one where the actual host device in the internal network is not really directly accessed by something from the external network. It is actually accessed through the proxy server, where it's actually would be the application is being executed. So looking at a real simple example of where you might apply some packet filtering using an access control list at a border router would simply be one to filter ICMP from the public network. And why would you want to do that? Well, one of the first aspects of hacking is you have to go explore. You need to find something to hack, and the ping command is probably the simplest thing that is out there. You just start pinging IP addresses till you find an active host, and simply, it's pretty common today to block that often from the public internet. And we can do that by basically adding that access control list at a border router. And to actually, again, to do that, kind of expanding of what that network actually might look like from a conceptual view to an actual small network, we would first create an access control list. In this scenario, we're going to deny ICMP. Again, this is, remember, we can deny a protocol, in this case, the ICMP protocol. Also, recall that every access control list must have at least one permit statement. In this case, then there's our permit statement to permit everything else IP. And then, of course, we simply apply that access control list to the ingress interface of our border router. We still can ping host devices from the trusted side of the network all we want to, but someone from the outside really can't. So with firewalls, I think there's some cautions that you should keep in mind. One is don't create a false sense of security in the context of, I have a firewall, that's all I need. Remember to utilize the concept or the principle of defense in depth and multiple protection schemes. And Brad made some very good points that doing a little bit can go a long way to preventing cyber incidents from happening. Often, any amount of barrier is enough to cause a threat actor to move on, so to speak. There's also a tendency, I think, to maximize the host devices that you might put in zones or layers or subnets. But this is really kind of a bad practice. You tend to do that to make your life easier. But you're better from a security standpoint to minimize those hosts think back to the principle of defense in depth and sort of the concept of that castle. If a barrier or a layer is breached, the impact can be minimal, as opposed to, well, I've reached the inside of the network, I have access to everything. Again, we want to begin with the policy, then develop the rule to implement that policy. And a little bit of caution sometimes when using that old PC as your firewall. We need to think about throughput, particularly in our broadcast environments where we're dealing with real-time media. That is our content. And we need to be aware of that throughput. Often some of these older PCs with older network interface cards, they simply don't have the horsepower really to have a throughput addressing the real-time media that we may have. Of course, a lot of variables that come into play there, but one area I might be cautious. And also the latency that sometimes occur, particularly because of our real-time media that we often handle. And then finally, as I've think briefly mentioned earlier, don't look egress filtering, and again, be a good network citizen. In other words, let's not let some potential attack or threat be executed in our network that can further impact other networks, whether that's our own network or someone else's through the public internet. And finally, we talked about the ultimate firewall. Well, here's one that, Brad had mentioned, well, if you don't need it on the, you don't need that access on the public internet, don't put that particular device. That's kind of the air gap method. And this is kind of another little funny one that you might have seen floating around the internet, so to speak. So that's kind of my introduction to firewall, I think, terminology and maybe a little bit of technology. And you'll see some contact information for me. So I certainly do welcome questions. So far, I've never been flooded with that 110 questions that I can't answer. So I'll throw a general, I'm open to questions anytime, either today, of course, or down the road. So Barry, back to you.
Hey, Wayne, that was really nice. I appreciate it very much, going through those pointers and the terminology. Couple of minutes here, we'll have Danny, and he's going to actually do a live demonstration of much of what you just showed and what Brad talked about. And I think that's really important. And question that I'm going to toss out here to you and to Brad. We're talking about limiting ingress and egress and VPNs. And there's a tendency, in fact, the one that you were showing was an IP address that you would allow to connect. Well, that's real nice if you're at your office or at your home, but suppose you're taking a laptop with you and visiting different stations or transmitter sites. Now you have to list every single one of the possible IP addresses that could be used, or is there a better way?
That was the any.
That was the, yeah. Well, I think if you're remote, and let's go to our favorite coffee house, so to speak. And I think if you're remote, then you need to be using a VPN that's going to be encrypted. And that's how you get around that problem, because obviously you don't know what that IP address is of that remote setup.
No,
But for instance,
yeah, no, you don't even know that the Wi-Fi network that you're connecting to at the Starbucks isn't a rogue device that literally was set up. it will literally answer, yes, I'm whoever you want me to be. You'll connect to it, and now they're logging all of your traffic.
That's right.
No, the
You,
first thing you do is make a VPN. If again, if you know how, please, it's just, but be aware, yeah, they're
yeah. And, VPNs well, VPN still can be complex. Setting up the gateway that you might set up in your facility router is probably the most complex, but gosh, your iPhone has a VPN client in it. Windows certainly has VPN clients, as we have certainly seen from Brad's demonstration. So, from the user or client side, that's really not that challenging anymore. If there is a challenge, it goes back to that gateway, and that might be simply another service that is enabled within your quote facility or station firewall.
Great. Bill?
Yeah, I guess, if you take the example of your local coffee shop as your temporary technical HQ, some of the VPN software solutions allow you to check a box that routes everything over the VPN, so that if you go out to a website outside, it goes over the VPN and outside. And what that does is it essentially puts the
gateway.
the VPN in the middle of any attempts to connect to your PC or whatever device you're using at the coffee shop. If you don't check that box, then you have a connection to the address space at the station or wherever you're trying to talk to, but all the other traffic comes and goes on the coffee shop's local area network. That's a vector for attack, and if you're that's something you want to avoid. If you're on a college campus, and the college IT guys say, "Oh, we've got a firewall," and you're on the same local area network domain as all the other kids on the campus, then it's a pretty rough and tumble environment. A lot of people with time on their hands and mad capabilities. So you might want to run your own firewall at the edge of your studio.
Another layer, yeah.
That's true.
Yes, that layer concept further expanded.
Yep.
And in a large
your automation system, yeah.
Yep, in a large facility, not necessarily physically large, but large in terms of host devices, it's not uncommon to have internal firewalls between those between layers. And once again, going back to the packet filtering, if you think about when you build a network, and I tend to preach, the first step in providing a safe environment is you have to have the right network architecture, which is this layered or segmented network infrastructure. Well, you take it and you break everything apart, but then you have host devices that need to talk to host devices between those layers or those subnets. And to me, that's where the access control list comes in handy, because yes, I can let the automation computer talk to the content server, for instance, but not everything on the network talk to everything. I can limit those conversations. Again, not only just from IP addresses, but maybe the port numbers that are used for those, let's say, just a simple file transfer.
Yes, and you've really just opened the door to Danny, because that's what he does, among other things. He has, I don't know, was it Danny, 50, 150? How many people are you running off your system?
Oh, well, we, in addition to the radio stations, we have wireless internet. We have probably 150 customers.
So that means that you have to be very careful to make sure that, as Wayne says, you're segmented and each of the sections doesn't allow the wrong people to access the wrong things. And you've chosen the Cambium routers.
Yeah, are you ready now?
Please.
I'll start talking. First of all, I want to compliment both Brad and Wayne about their conversations. Brad mentioned and showed us one of the screens of PepLink. We use PepLink at some of our facilities as the first layer, if you will. And we also have some PC-based stuff, Smooth Wall, which we run at some of the others. That's a PC-based program that you can buy. And as Wayne says, put it in a computer, or Brad said, put it in a computer and make you basic firewall. There's several different software packages, some that are free, some of them that you buy and stuff of that nature. Let me go over here. First of all, let me say this. I am one who likes to find a product and after much work, find that it works well, doesn't have any problems, doesn't hang up, doesn't have to be rebooted, stuff of that nature. And we've settled many years ago on the Cambium product. Cambium is an offshoot of a Motorola product that was developed in Schaumburg before Motorola sold off all their divisions. And they ended up selling Cambium over to a group in England. It's controlled out of a group in England. They have many, many products. They have point to multi-point radios, point-to-point radios, and all the frequency ranges, including unlicensed as well as licensed 11, 23, and gig all the way up to 60 gig. Although I don't know anybody would be, in my opinion, stupid enough to put in a 60 gig microwave link, unless it was you had two buildings sitting next to each other. Because let's just say any rain is going to kill it. It's bad enough 10 gig and above. I have here, I'm going to share my screen if I may. Let me go back over here and find the screen. Here we go. There is, Cambium makes several different versions of routers. The primary one, which is no longer manufactured, is called an R200. And an R200 is a basic router. It's pretty intelligent. By the way, Cambium has various software upgrades that you can implement in the router. They also, these routers, as well as the radios, they have a cloud-based system that these guys talk to, and every few minutes, I can go over to the cloud base and I can see everything that we have online, see what kind of traffic it is it's going through. For example, some of our internet customers, some of them suck a lot of data. They'll suck 4 or 5 gig worth of data a day, and the other ones, they don't do too much. But the R200 is a basic router. The P that is on there means that it has an internal power supply, or shall say external brick like you have on a Dell laptop. And it feeds not only the router, but it feeds 30 volts out the WAN port that you can use to feed the radio with. The 200 series by itself without the P does not have that. So you have to have in our case, you have to have the radio and the wall wart to power it, and you also have the R200 router. The R200 router gives you 100 base T in and out of the router. Most people don't need any more than that, certainly on a residential basis, and we don't offer any more than that. There is a later model that's called an R201, and the R201 has both, it's actually 1,000 base T on the WAN side and 1,000 base T on the 4 ports for the LAN coming out of it. Johnny Stigler has which is on here, he has an R201 running 1,000 base T. I decided, Barry had asked me a couple of times before if I might do a little talk on routing, or actually port forwarding, if you will. And port forwarding is pretty simple once you understand how it works. And I'm going to bring up here, actually an R200. Before I do that, I'm going to show you the need for port forwarding. We operate several radio stations, and we have 2 studios. This particular station happens to be in Junction, Texas. And here, the studio is here. It's where I'm located. And we actually feed IP audio from here headed to Junction, Texas. I'm not a fan of barracks. I've been through that phase years ago. You're lucky to keep them running, in my opinion. They squawk and squeak and stuff of that nature, and all the different firmware options. We have been through all that. So several years ago, I run on to Diva Broadcast. I had bought a couple of things from them before. They came out, the guy came out over there in Bulgaria with IP-based encoders and decoders. And this is actually on the air right now. You're looking at Junction, Texas. The IP address that we are sending from here where I'm located is pointed to the particular IP address that you see up there at the top. And I'm being, this is actually on the air, so hopefully nobody tries again to hack us. But at any rate, I'm going to show you here why the need in just a moment for various things. This is behind an R200, I think an R200 or R201 router at that location, this particular decoder. I'm going to log into that router, if I may. Not router, but the decoder. And in this decoder, the normal web interface is port 80. However, we don't want it on port 80. We want it on to be something different. So down here in the general, let's see here, let me back up, maybe network. I have changed that from port 80 to port 82, which keeps somebody with a web browser trying to get into it. At least it gives us a little protection, if you will. We have FTP implemented also. One thing that we like about these encoders and decoders is they have a memory card in there. They'll hold up to 16 gig memory card, like you put in your little camera. SD micros, I believe it's called. And you can store music in there. And in the event that we lose our main stream coming from here, we have it set up so we'll automatically go over and start playing music. And if you look down here, this particular unit has a 8 gigabit memory card. And we're using about half of that for music storage, if you will, inside the device. So if the internet goes down or your encoder goes down, this device is smart enough to switch over and start playing music. Let me see here, where am I at? It's not the proper screen. Here's the proper screen. If we look, I don't have it turned on right now. I can do that, and I can easily do that, by the way, going right over here to MP3 player, and I want to save it. You'll see this turns on right now. If the internet goes down, basically this thing is going to switch over and start playing about 2,000 or 3,000 songs that's stored on that memory. It's an MP3 format, 256 kilobit. I have it set up so it shuffles the songs so you don't hear them alphabetically. You can set it up one of several different ways. And it also, we have jingles, we have liners in there, ID, and after 3 songs play, it's going to play one of those, if you will. Again, this is strictly if we lose the internet over here, etc. I assume everybody can see my mouse, if you will. Let me go back over here to IP audio. The need for port routing revolves back to this. We send from this studio, and it is the IP address at this studio. The encoder, Diva encoder, is actually transmitting HHC, AACHE audio from here. I think we're running relative low. We're running about 48 kilobit. I highly recommend AACHE over anything else. I've been through all of them. I've tested all of them over many years, and that is very good. In fact, we do our football broadcast, basketball broadcast on using AACHE at about 24 kilobit. We do everything from the press box. We have nobody at the studios. We actually put ourselves on the air from the press box. All the play-by-play is done from there. We insert the commercials with the laptop there. We broadcast the halftime at the bands. We broadcast the second half. And when we get through, we collect a little magic switch at another secret IP address. And unlike that magic switch, and basically we put it back on to the automation. The automation continues to play. Back to this, the encoder is actually encoding AACHE audio on port 6000, okay? And that is being fed to this decoder. We also can turn this one on. This is another IP address that we have that we're using, port 8000, that we can send down there. In addition to it, this box actually will decode RTP audio, which is of course one way, and that uses typically 6004. That's what it comes from the factory. We don't change that. I actually can go over here to, I actually can turn on the backup if I want to. I'm going to turn that off, and I can turn on the RTP. So if for some reason we have trouble talking TCP with the main audio stream, it'll actually switch over automatically to the RTP stream that we typically send to. And if it can't get either one of those because of the main, the internet being down, whatever, it'll switch over to the MP3. So right now I'm not using that, so I'm going to turn that off. So this is very important. The ports that you have here, let me emphasize that on each IP address that's out there, whether it's public or private, there are 65,535 ports that you can use to send traffic to and from a device. And once again, in our case, we're using port 6000 here on this device. I'm going to go to the next screen. We actually have off the air audio. This audio is feeding into this Barracks encoder, which I told you I'm not a fan of Barracks, but I don't throw them away if we had them. We have the modulation monitor of the AM transmitter being fed into this encoder. We're actually looking at it. We're actually controlling it right now. And that encoder, by the way, this is the IP address on the LAN, if you will, past the Cambium router. We have to set it up in order for someone to listen, or us to listen back here. We have to set it up with ports. So we set it up with ports. This particular one, I'm set it up with these ports here. And these ports here, for example, we're running an RTP RTP stream back to this IP address using this port. Now, this particular address out there in the world is trying to get to that device, and the router will not let it get to this device without port forwarding, if you will. Same way down here with the port, with these ports that I have located down here. So we have to implement those ports or turn them on in the actual router / firewall. This happens to be the router and firewall that is down there. And if we go over here and look, This is the WAN side. This is the LAN side. That device is actually serving DHCP, if you will. Let me go back over here to status, if you will. And let's see, LAN host. That's going to show you how many devices that we have on out there, okay? Some of these are set up with static, majority of them. Some other devices, one of my guys lives down there. This is his iPhone. And this happens to be the Dish Network or whatever it is. Johnny knows more about that than I do. So in that router down there, in order to get into those remote devices, we have to set up port forwarding. Now, before I set up port forwarding, I believe Wayne's mentioned it. He mentioned DMZ. On most routers, there is a provision for DMZ. And what that means is if you turn it on, you can take the WAN or the internet side, if you will, the public side, and route every port, 65,535 ports, to a single IP address, which is dangerous, as I mentioned. So we don't do that, of course. And we have port forwarding set up. And I'm going to click on that. I'm going to show you that right now. In the Cambium routers, there's two different screens here. Let me move this thing over so I can move it here. There is a port forwarding table. There is a virtual server table. The port forwarding table is used when you do not need to translate an IP address. In this case, see here, the Barracks AM, which is listening off the air from the modulation monitor, I have port 4000 through 4200 turned on. So if someone goes to the WAN address and tries to get to this device, the only way they're going to be able to listen to those streams is use somewhere between 4000 and 4200 with the ports I have turned on. I can go down and actually make a lot more line items and basically put each individual port in here, but for simplicity's sake, I just go for 4000, 4200. The protocol over here, for example, I'm going to edit this, for example. This basically is my name for what it is. This is the LAN IP address. This is the port range I have turned on. And if I go, for example, I go here and I make this 4015, it'll only let things through from 4000 to 4015 to this particular device with this IP address. In this case, I have both TCP and UDP turned on. UDP being one way, TCP being bidirectional, and I have them both turned on for a couple of reasons. So I'm going to hit apply here, and that is going to save that in that particular router. Now, it will not implement till I go down here and reboot it. So I'm not going to do that instead of reusing it. So you will see here to get into various things here. Let me take a look. What else? This happens to be an APRS for you hams out there that I have turned on. This is the LAN IP address of the APRS transceiver. And we're using port 14,580 to get the data in, back and forth to that APRS radio, if you will. We also have FTP ports turned on for various things. This happens to be to the Diva decoder and where I load music into it. Of course, the decoder is locked down also with username and password. So in order to get to the decoder that I just showed you, not only do you have to know the public address, you have to know the ports that's on it, then it will let you to the device. In this case is FTP. This is what I load music in that device. We can also do port translation, okay? So for example, our Sage box down there, if you will, I'm giving you all my secrets here. The Sage box down there, if you type in the public IP address with :86, this is the public port, the router is automatically going to convert that port or make a port change internally back to port 80. And it's going to send it to this IP address right here. So if you go into 86 and go into 80, you're going to go to the Sage, if you will. Of course, once again, it's locked down, if you will. Here's the APRS device. In order to get to that, you got to have port 90 going in, I translate port 80, and that feeds it to the APRS transceiver, if you will. So if you're, for example, here, this happens to be let me stop and think what that happens to be the FM decoder, and I am not doing any translation. If you run the WAN address, public address, :81, that just feeds it through over to that device, which is on this particular IP address here. So as you can see, it's relatively easy to do port addressing. What Brad and particularly Wayne mentioned is many, many times more complex. But for a small station owner, he can go buy one of these routers. And I realize there's many brands. You can buy D-Link, you can buy TP-Link, and the other company that Cisco bought out. And somebody have to remind me what their name is. Netgear, and that's another one.
Linksys.
But what I found on all of those many years ago in testing those for the wireless internet stuff, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the port forwarding works, sometimes it doesn't, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many years ago, we selected on these Cambium routers. In fact, Jack Selmeyer is on here. Jack has one in his house, and I can remotely get into it and make any changes that is his house and office, and I can make any changes that needs to be done. Over here on this list here, let me see here, here we go. This actually is talking about every 3 or 4 minutes to the server up in Illinois. And once again, I can go to this particular address, enter my username and password, and it allows me to see everything we have on our networks. So these routers are probably $100 new. Again, the R200, they don't make any more. That's a 100 megabit interface on both the WAN and the LAN side. The R201 is 1,000 megabit on the WAN and the LAN. The new one is an R195, which is 1,000 megabit on the WAN and the LAN. We use, for the new installs, we use the R195W, which I will tell you in just a moment what's different from the R200 and the 201. The R200 and the R201 have 2 SIP ports coming out the back. You'll notice that router has the capabilities of running SIP internet or SIP telephone traffic through this device. And it has 2 FXS ports on the back of it. We do not use any of our routers. We do not provide SIP telephone interface to our internet customers. 2 or 3 reasons. One of all, in my opinion, it's just a big headache. Not going to make a lot of money off of it. It's a lot of work to implement it. It's a lot of work to keep the QoS directed toward the SIP traffic so that the customer does not call and say, well, my telephone's breaking up. The other reason is I find the folks at the FCC, if you run SIP as the internet provider, you have to make periodic reports. You have to contribute to the universal, whatever it is, fund that they have, that they basically pay the other carriers, such as Bell and Verizon, to provide service out in the rural areas. So it's a major problem. So we don't do that. So the R195W routers that we buy do not have the 2 SIP ports on the back. We don't want it. We don't need it. We don't use it. In our case is out on the customers that's out there. We come in with our IP address on the WAN side from our wireless radios, which are encrypted, 128 kilobit AES, and it goes in the WAN port. It goes through the router, and if they have a TV or something that's close to the router, we try to plug the TV into the back of the router. There's 4 LAN ports back there. If not, we basically take RG11s and crimp them and shove them in the blank holes. So some idiot out there doesn't come along and unplug the cable out of the WAN side and look at it, whatever, and he plugs it whatever hole he wants to. So that presents a problem. So I wanted to show you how this works. Now,
Danny,
yes, sir.
Danny, while you're at it, and just to shock people that have stayed this long to enjoy this, how expensive would it be for them to get one of these cambiums?
Well, if you go on eBay right now, you can probably buy you one for $10 or $20. Okay, used. First thing you want to do when you get it is default it. There's a little pin in the back. You can default it, and it puts it back to standard. You can program it. You can download the updates and put in it manually, or over here on the cloud. When I bring up the cloud, I can look at the stuff, and if I want to do updates on any radio or any router, I just click on it, tell it to update it, and it will update it with the latest firmware. We run about two or three levels back from what it is. In this case, we're running version 4.7.1 R4. It's revision 4. They've got some other, I think, 4.7.5, 4.8s and stuff of that nature. But we've done some testing on them. But once again, if I find something that works and it plays well, we leave it alone. Okay. And we continue to buy those things and put them in service. I think I saw Chris Alexander just put in some Cambium links on Facebook. He just put in a link that was unlicensed on 5 gig at one of his sites. He does have some licensed stuff. The stuff just plays. Very seldom do you have any problem with it. The biggest problem that you have with it is lightning bolt goes by and induces voltage into the Ethernet cable. So you want to run, if you run anything like a remote radio, you want to run shielded Cat5. We run outdoor shielded Cat5, make sure it's bonded on each end, and that basically retards any impulse that may get in there when a lightning strike goes by. But if you go on eBay, just type in Cambium router, and you'll see all the routers on there. And if you sort them by lowest cost, you'll see some on there for, I saw one a couple of days ago for $10, and there's a bunch on there for $20. So a small station can easily set up a basic router for virtually no cost and set up his port forwarding. He has to know what ports that he's trying to send from one location to the other. And he basically, on the LAN side, he plugs his stuff in the LAN side, and he goes over here and he turns on the port forwarding for all the devices that he has. Once again, that sends it to the particular device, particular IP addresses. Like this here, this is sending port 6000, 6004 to the AM Diva decoder, and the AM Diva decoder IP address is 102, 11.102. So anybody that gets the WAN address and tries to get here 6000, 6004, they're going to be directed through the router, or port forwarded through the router to this particular IP address, which is the AM Diva decoder. And if they're not running the same protocol or nothing, the Diva decoder just ignores it. It's also tied back to, the Diva decoder is also tied back, so it only will talk to the encoder at, for example, our studios. And those have specific IP addresses, specific ports. So as Wayne described it in his fine presentation, it's only people that can get to it basically is from the IP addresses I tell it to. So that's kind of it. I wanted to kind of bring that up. Barry had commented he had in the past a lot of people asking how they could set up a router. And again, there's all kinds of different routers you can buy, different brands and stuff. The interface is quite a bit different on the various ones. And again, I haven't had a lot of luck years ago with the various ones. So we standardized on the Cambium. Years ago, I'd used some Ubiquity stuff. Did not have a lot of luck with the Ubiquity stuff. And we moved over to the Cambium, which cost a little more money, but it just sits there in place.
Well, Danny, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I know that as you go through there and you take each piece of equipment and set the port up and set the instructions to the firewall, that all your 150 customers out there get served well and nobody interacts. And
we actually, in the case of the wireless internet customers, we actually have two other devices that firewalls that we have to go through before it gets out on the public internet. And those devices, for example, peer-to-peer sharing, like they share music stuff, I block all that. There's several other things I block all that, various things. So if you're one of my wireless internet customers, you're pretty well protected because you're going through three devices that are
just as Wayne was talking about different levels and making sure it's secure. Bill?
The PepLink stuff works good. The other advantage of the PepLink also for your radio guys, they make various models. I think we're using 580s now, and the 580s have multiple WAN ports that if you're using a primary WAN and it goes down, the internet, whatever goes down, it will automatically switch over to the other one. The other thing that the PepLink has, it has built-in VPN that you can set up and run VPN from one PepLink to the other, and it will actually run on multiple WANs from one end to the other. I did not show you that on the Cambium. The Cambium also has VPN built into it. So if you have a VPN provider, you can set it up, point the Cambium stuff through them, and everything will route through them.
Okay, thank you. Bill, show your hand.
So, port forwarding is a very seductive thing. But I can tell you from 40 years of looking at firewall logs that there's a bunch of scripts out there that start at port number 1 and go through port number 64,000, 700, and they go and they look for an open port. And once they find an open port, then they profile the port. And if there's anything that looks like a web server on it, it's a web server. If there's anything that looks like an FTP server, it's an FTP server. If there's anything that looks like a file server, all these things behave in a specific way that is fingerprintable. So it's very seductive to say, well, I'm going to just do port forwarding because then I can get to it from anywhere with any device. Yeah, sure, but and the image I think some people have is that there's these master hackers out there whose life is spent in the basement of their mother's house, and all they do is hack all day. Well, those guys write scripts, and they give them to a bunch of people that are colloquially known as script kiddies, and the script kiddies don't know anything about how to write those things, but they know how to run them. And they run them from computers from all over the world. And it is just, if you start going down that path, if you're not using an encrypted VPN to connect to your sites, and you're just changing the port numbers, it's just making the access more obscure. But it's not going to keep the people who will set up a script running on their computer and come back in the morning and see what it hit, because they're going to run through every port.
You're absolutely correct.
And you know, for us, the FCC says, you know, not only do you have to have control of the transmitter, they've always said that you have to maintain physical control of the transmitter, and doing whatever you can do remotely needs to be secured. Now they're kind of saying, well, now we really mean it, and here's the rule, and here's, you know, and here's the NAL that goes with it. But these are things that I think we have broadcasters have gotten off kind of scot-free. We just aren't a very interesting target. But there's a lot of people who don't like what we broadcast, that have access to all these black hat tools, and you gotta expect that if you're frequency agile, power agile, audio input agile transmitter can be accessed over the internet, and it is a target for somebody who can change the channel to whatever they want, change the output power to whatever they want, change the input, audio input, to go to their favorite streaming site, to retransmit whatever that streaming site is. And you know, if you haven't changed the root password in your transmitter, if you're still using the one that came from the factory, they can lock you out from the transmitter. They can change the password. So I mean, take it seriously.
Very good. Anybody else have a question that they'd like to bring to the floor, and maybe ask a question about your port routing? And we've mostly talked about simple sites. Place to start, isn't it? At the transmitter, where you have the transmitter and maybe your codec. You get to the studio, and as was just mentioned, I think by Wayne, you could have automation talking to one place. You could have your sales department, your bookkeeper, your general manager, your program department, all talking partially to different ones and partially talking to other ones. And it gets very complex at that point. But at this transmitter site, yeah, you can get away pretty quickly with what? Little port forwarding and very secure username and password.
The more the better. But at least something.
Do not leave it default.
It's yeah. Such a simple one.
I think you were talking about Jeff Welton's experiences on Shodan, which is a site which lists open boxes, things that report to the internet who they are and what their internet address is. And if you see a bunch of barracks or Sage you can go ahead and, not very legal. Of course, I didn't stop them in China or wherever, but you can hack your way in. And in the case of the barracks boxes, it became very common for a short period of time that suddenly some profane rap music from England took over a transmitter. And in one case that I know down in Texas, the FCC inspector happened to be on a call that day, and it was pretty hairy for the particular station.
Yeah.
Barry, one thing that might make an interesting future presentation would be a maybe a little demo of what you can learn with Nmap. Bill mentioned profiling, servers and learning information. That could make an interesting one, just to make an awareness of what all types of information can be gleaned from
Sure.
a mystery IP address.
I think
maybe a
Danny
firewall log.
recommends Angry IP.
No, a firewall log might be educational as well, just so people would see that. Like I said, I wasn't joking about the 100 attacks last second. I'm sure that the previous last second there was 100 more.
But you have to have that log turned on.
Right, turning it on is a good thing. So
So you know what, how
But it's-
many attempts are being made to your
Exactly.
network. And that's part of that kind of that, I don't know, I'll call it the cybersecurity hygiene, is monitoring your infrastructure so you know what is normal.
Yep. Grady? Grady had his hand up. They
Takes me a minute to find the right button because my cursor moves too fast. This has been a very, very good presentation. All three of these presenters have really good discussions of different facets of all the issues. I'd like to say in particular, Wayne brought up a subject that years ago, a friend of mine who's not on with us today had an experience where he got a job at a cluster of radio stations in a particular market, and the owner of that cluster had clusters in several other cities and other states. And the IT people who had been managing all of this stuff had edge protection at each of the radio stations, but they had a universal VPN that tied all those markets together so that anything that happened on any one of those networks would make it to all the other radio stations. And they lost computers in all of their markets because of that. So Wayne's particular comment about, protect in between. Don't just put everything in a big bucket. Have little buckets here and there so that you can protect one section of your system from another section. That's a very good instruction.
Yeah, and of course, ransomware is getting a lot of attention. And one of the aspects of ransomware is once a host device is infected, there's this lateral movement to try to go affect others. So that is also a way to minimize that impact. Is one, minimize the number of hosts that's in one of those layers or zones, but also protect between the layers and the zones. So it does not spread throughout your whole company infrastructure, whether that's the mom and pop radio station with 10 computers to, every major network broadcaster. We've probably read about them in a trade publication,
Mr. Mackey has commented on a client of his. I thought it's very interesting. The login and password was the same as from the movie Spaceballs, Air Supply, and the President's Luggage. Does anyone remember the President's Luggage password? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are tremendous numbers of boxes of all sorts on the internet where the password is password
or blank.
or blank.
Yep. And keep in mind those same scripts that we were mentioning earlier. There also is a password dictionaries that have the basically ones from previous successful attempts in.
Yeah, that was a good point that Brad made, that a passphrase is really a very smart thing to do, because the dictionary guys won't find that. And the only way you're going to get bombed on there is if somebody hacks the system, figures out what the not encryption, what's the other word here? Where all the passwords and
The brute force.
all the usernames and passwords are encrypted on the server. And once they know a password and know what the encrypted password is, and they can solve it by going back, then they can attack you. And that's the reason, one reason why you would want to change your passwords from time to time, especially if you're on a very large server with many thousands or millions of users, because there's a very good chance one of those bozitos is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get hacked, and now your password can be decrypted.
Right. It's gotten more difficult with some of the operating systems they've learned, because these things, you used to be able to get, if you had access to a particular file on a domain server, you could have everybody's username and password probably in about an hour. And if they had good passwords, it might take you a day. Yeah, but they at least have started to insist and put policies in place that are, we all look at them as annoying, but they actually have good ideas. Change your password, and it needs some kind of complexity. But blank, change the username. That's like having a different password, because it does, you don't get a list of usernames. Again, it's just one other little layer. Admin should never be root admin. That most things that are trying to be nice to you, boxes that you set up, won't let you do it. Like actually advertise that over the internet. So it's a,
Or they'll force you to change it.
right. They just won't allow the root or admin to be an account that's going to be shared. Like if you have a VPN, it won't be admin. Typically, it's going to force a different name. Say, I'm not going to allow the common name in there.
Mm-hmm.
You see it all the time. Again, that's one of the most things you see on the router logs is somebody trying to break their way in, and it's always admin with a different password, and they have a list that they may have a list of the most common 100, and they spray that at it, and then they may or may not move on, depends on how persistent they are. But again, you will not keep out a targeted attack from the Russian government. Good luck with that one. But again, it's going to be, you will keep out, it's just a matter of raising how close you get to 100%, but you will get fairly close without a ton of work. And then you say, well, how important is what I'm trying to protect? So you may even have different layers and say, well, this stuff here, kind of like Wayne talked about the DMZ, it's more vulnerable than the trusted network, and there's different levels of trust, but again, the DMZ, you're saying, all right, well, if I need my web server to be out there, I'll put it in the DMZ. I've got a backup of all of its goodies, so just in case they get to it and they make it explode, that's won't like it, have a bad day, but I'm not out of business. But then you don't put your web server on the inside of your network where it's going to go take down the rest of the dudes while it's at it. That whole layering is, isolate your automation network, things like that. It's not always practical, but again, if it is, do it.
Very good advice. Anyone else have a question they'd like to pose to our three erudite speakers, or And we explained it all. We're going to do some more stuff. I think it's next week. Now we're going to do some open source apps. And we're going to talk about that and things that you can accomplish. JD?
Right, it takes a while to find the button.
There you go.
I would just like to throw this out that all of these password breaking devices, they work by trying a whole bunch of them quickly. How many systems have set up in their password, you put in username and password, a time delay, meaning for a particular username, if you put in the wrong password, it says, oh, you can't try it again for a minute.
Actually, I can tell
That
you.
slows them down a lot.
Actually,
Not enough of it, but
I can tell you the modem that CoxNet provides does exactly that. After 2 or 3 errors, it says you must wait 30 seconds before you try again. And if you keep at it, it'll say you must wait a minute before you can try again.
30 seconds is a long, long time.
On the other hand, Nautel does not. If you
Yeah, I think the point is there's not enough devices that do that. You're seeing that more and more in the what I'll say consumer, and I'll put your Comcast modem in that category, but you don't see that in too much, let's say, equipment, whether
Yeah.
it's that EAS box or the transmitter or whatever.
can't speak for all of them, but I can speak for Nautel in this case. You have to use the AUI. The transmitter will not respond if you simply put in the IP address :80 whatever. You have to use the AUI and then it'll respond. So it's not just a matter of finding the port that's open, it's having the right software. And for some equipment that works. For other equipment, well, like the
Well,
Cox modem, you can get right to the Cox screen, but you better not mess up after 2 or 3 times.
Right. Well, also the Croc screen, you can tell it, I want someone from outside to have access or not. Mind you, you know that when the cable guy can reset your router, the fact that you said don't provide remote access isn't quite true, but they just have their own backdoor into it. But even the AUI is again, I would feel reasonably confident in that as well. It's not that I disagree, but I tell you, the Russian hacker guy that spends enough time is going to get right through that. Just give him a little bit of time. But again, there's limits to what is practical to do. And then you say, well, how, what am I trying to protect? And again, this is very important to us, but it's, and then some of it is also, are the Russians really interested in breaking into my Nautel? So how much effort are they going to put in? And you could be wrong. So, but you do the best you can.
Very good. Lamar, hi.
Yeah, good afternoon. Just to address a little bit about that timeout for a password prompt. Let me just relate a quick little anecdote about a piece of equipment I have here. It's actually a network video recorder made by a company that starts with an L, and I needed to get access to this particular recorder for a couple of different reasons. I was able to download a update firmware, mount that as a file system, pull the hashed tables off of it, and in about 10 minutes, John the Ripper had my root password for that particular NVR. Those types of sidechain attacks occur a lot with Internet of Things type devices, like some of these encoders we have. So even if it does, it's on the manufacturer to make sure there's no backdoors that are in these devices, because John the Ripper, it'll get them. It doesn't take long on a modern 24 core Threadripper server to do a whole bunch of hashes. So just another little angle on that.
Very good. Thank you.
Cat and mouse. Yeah.
Barry, I'm going to run. I certainly enjoyed being here and seeing everyone today, and look forward to seeing everybody down the road.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Wayne, and
I'm
look
gonna-
forward to have you back again one day.
I'm gonna
Yep.
run it myself here and appreciate you guys' patience and listening, and I hope it was helpful. And
Really good. A lot of comments here about how much they appreciate what you're doing, and thank you so much.
hope it helps, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Okay,
Check in. Thanks.
bye now.
Well, I'm going to let you all go. In fact, I'm going to go program an R200 router for a new customer and get it all set up, and we'll get it out to him later today. So I'll see you all later.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much.
Okay, see you later.